Conversation. This civic media program is produced by WCKN, student-run cable television of Clarkson University. This program is a partnership production of Clarkson Center for Excellence in the Communication, St. Lawrence County chapter of the American Association of University Women and the St. Lawrence County League of Women Voters. My name is Sarah Campbell, and I am a student in a course at Clarkson called Mass Media and Society. I and a number of my classmates provide the production crew for this series. Our program today is a conversation with Steve Yurgartis, candidate for mayor of the Village of Potsdam. Speaking with him today are two Potsdam residents, Sue Rice and Bob Burns. All of you, welcome to Clarkson. Now, Sue, I turn the show over to you to get us started.
Thank you. Steve, it just seems like a blink of time has occurred between when you ran for village trustee and now you're looking to run for village mayor. Would you like to tell us a little bit about why and be reflective on your term as village trustee?
Reflective of my term as village trustee? Well, if I didn't enjoy it, I wouldn't be here running for mayor again, or running for mayor and continuing to be involved in local government. It's been a challenge. There's been a lot to learn, and when I first went into it, I didn't realize how much there was to learn. I spent a lot of time studying the issues, and I guess the reason I'm interested in continuing is because I've put all that investment of learning how things work, and I think that I have some knowledge that will help us move forward.
You know that there are going to be very significant problems, and you pointed out some of them. The ongoing issue of health insurance for employees, retired employees, is one of the ones that probably is as difficult as anything to tackle. Can you speak a little bit about that particular issue, Steve?
We do have increasing liabilities for our so-called post-employment benefits for our employees, and it is adding up to be a significant amount of money. It's a problem that's been a long time in developing. I think it's a problem that will take a long time to solve, but it's time to get started on solving that problem. And the way we have to do that, I think, is to bring into line our contracts with our union employees to be closer to industry or commercial norms. That will take some time, but I think that we can do that over time. I think we have to, because at the current rate, my belief is that our current rate of expenditure or commitment to those post-employment benefits is not sustainable for the village. So I don't think we're in a financial crisis at all, but we're in a position where we need to get to work seriously on making sure that that problem does not develop into a crisis for the village. So like I say, it's a long-term problem and will require a long-term solution.
Do you believe the solution should be encapsulated at the local level, or do you believe it's a broader issue than just your local government? The school district faces that challenge. We know that the local county is also burdened by the high cost of healthcare, and within our small little community, we have 5 taxing districts.
It's certainly a problem that goes beyond the local boundaries. There's no doubt about that. I mean, our whole healthcare system and how those expenses are distributed is a national issue, and we are working on it nationally, of course. But there are local issues that are involved. The state pension plan that most of our union employees are involved with, the village is required to submit a certain amount of money every year to that pension plan, and once that employee retires, the village's commitment is finished. That New York State pension fund then pays that employee's pension. But at a local level, it's locally where we decide on what health insurance benefits a retired employee will receive. And so that is a local decision and something that we can affect locally within the bounds of the bigger picture of how healthcare is delivered in our country.
That means there's going to have to be some very significant negotiating skills involved and some compromise involved in this particular solution. Do you think that you see the ability and the opportunity for that kind of compromise in the near future, or is it, when you say it's going to take a long time, how much of it can be done fairly quickly and how much of it is going to take a long time. What do you mean by a long time?
Well, that's difficult to predict, Bob. We have to negotiate with our unions, and those negotiations, the way New York State law is structured, puts a lot of the negotiating power with the unions. There's a so-called Triborough Amendment, for example, that you may be familiar with, that allows the current contract to continue forward. For example, our police department now has chosen, instead of negotiating a solution, has chosen to go to binding arbitration, which takes it out of the hands of folks like myself and local government in terms of negotiating. It goes before a board. So this is, to say it's a long-term problem, I think this is something that we just have to keep working at. And we can reduce our expenses not only through those contracts, but it may come to the point where we have to reduce our expenses by employing fewer people.
In terms of how the consumer views government, basically, I believe people just feel that it's your job, you should do it, instead of taking initiative themselves to participate. Is there something that you think the consumers in Potsdam could do to help back up your ability to negotiate?
Well, certainly I think folks could come to board meetings. They could advocate on what policies they want us to have. They could make it clear that they are not willing to continue to support some of the services at the level that they currently support at the cost of what they support. So certainly this is a democratic process, and people can become involved. I don't blame people for, in some sense, electing a representative and saying, okay, we've elected you, take care of things. I think that's quite reasonable. I found that in local government work, there are a lot of details. A lot of the stuff can be quite arcane and many times, many times quite boring. And so if people want me to work on that, I think that's quite reasonable. But certainly in terms of policy, I'd like to see more people get out and let me know what they'd like to see done.
Steve, recently we've talked about up to 244 apartments located, 100 in the village and 144 outside of the village. I just have a question. Where are the people who are going to rent those apartments going to come from?
Well, I don't know, Bob. Here, I think you're asking the wrong person. I think that's the developer that has to decide whether there is that market out there. And I'm hoping that when those apartments are built, in a sense, they build them, people will come. And but I don't know where the developers think those folks are going to come from.
Well, I guess that's the gist of my difficulty with this. I have the uncomfortable feeling that people vacate some of the existing rental property, absentee landlord rental property, to go into these new attractive apartments and leave some vacant houses in the village, because there are rental units outside of the village, but the majority are inside the village. And that's a point of concern for me, and I don't know have the answer to it, but I cannot imagine that immediately. I mean, our population in the census has remained pretty static for about 30 years, minor variations, but no major ones. I don't see major industry coming to us. I guess I don't see where they're going to come from without harming another section of the rental situation in the village.
I don't have an answer for that, Bob. I just don't know. I am concerned about the developer that's proposing to develop at the village boundary and asking for water and sewer from the village without being part of the village. That does concern me, because there's an issue of fairness there. My analogy is having somebody come and sit down to dinner and say, all I want is the dessert, and then I'm going to leave. And I don't know what it was like in your family, but when I sat down to dinner, it was important for me to first eat some vegetables, then I could get my dessert, and then I was expected to help clean up some of the dishes. And so I think when developers come to us, I think they have an obligation to be a full part of the community. If they want to sit down at that dinner table with friends and family and partake of the benefits of having that dinner before them, I think they need to be willing to eat some of their vegetables before they get the dessert, and be willing to help clean up with the dishes before they leave. And so there is a big issue of fairness there about taking village services as an a la carte menu, taking what they want, leaving the rest behind. But we'll try to resolve that with the town. There could be cases where providing water and sewer outside the village boundaries is appropriate, but I think we have to be very careful. We have to ask those developers to carry their fair share of the cost. There's an old joke where a car salesman is trying to sell a car, and he says to the customer, "We sell below our cost." And the customer says, "Well, how can you do that?" And he says, "Volume, son, volume." Well, you know, there's this idea that we can encourage economic development, but I don't think we should do it by giving away more than the benefits that we acquire. And so it just wouldn't be sustainable. And so we have to look at making sure that our developers are good citizens, paying their fair share of the cost, because the cost of selling water and sewer outside the village is not the cost of a gallon of water. The true cost involves the cost of maintaining a village, maintaining a population that's going to, for example, rent your apartments or shop at your business that you're developing. And so the cost is not just that gallon of water. It's the cost includes maintaining the entire community.
That seems to be true in many of the situations that the village and the town find themselves. One of the recent comments from Seneca Falls concerning dissolution talked about the fact that the problems are far more detailed and far more onerous than it appears on the surface. And there are not simple answers to complex questions. Now, we don't want dissolution to dominate this conversation, but I know that you have publicly indicated that you are not in favor of dissolution.
That's true.
Can you just expound a little on your reasons?
Well, I have three basic reasons. First is I believe that local interest deserves local representation. And I do think that the village has some particular unique interest. For example, we have 2 colleges. We have about 7,000 students that are close neighbors for most of the year. We have a hospital that sits in the middle of some of our nicest neighborhoods. We have about 70% of our housing is rental property. With some of those is absentee landlords, as you know. So we have some unique things, and those unique interests, I think, deserve local representation. In this case, a village government that would represent those interests. I also, when I look at the pros and the cons of dissolution, the potential pros and the potential cons, because nobody's really sure how it's going to turn out if it were to happen, I don't see the potential benefits outweighing the potential disadvantages. If you look at the projected tax savings to a village resident, if the dissolution plan was followed, if you look at the total property tax bill, which is school, county, village, town, the projected savings is 10.5% on your property tax bill if you're a village resident. Now, that's not insignificant, but is that 10.5% worth risking some of the potential disadvantages? For example, losing our significant police protection. We could lose sidewalk plowing. We could lose a strong code enforcement office that helps maintain those rental units, and so on. So there's a lot of uncertainty. Not only that, but the current town government has said that the first thing they will do if there is dissolution is go to Albany and request a police district. And if you look at the data from the consultant, it shows that if a police district is formed, that village taxes will actually go up compared to where they are now. I think that the chances of getting a police district are small, but it does indicate this sort of direction that the current town council is heading, and that concerns me. And so when I look at the pros versus the cons, I think the cons outweigh that. And then last, I think that this is not our last chance to vote on dissolution, but if we dissolve, it's our last chance to have a village. The way state law is written now, Article 17 allows a village to vote every 2 years on dissolution All it's required is a petition of 10% of the registered voters to force a referendum on dissolution. That's a low threshold. It's easy to get 10% of the voters to sign a petition like that, I'm sure. And so in 2 years from now, we could have another vote on dissolution. So I think this is not the last chance to dissolve. I think amid all the uncertainties, maybe it's time to sort of be careful, be prudent, and say, let's move forward carefully. The Dissolution Study Committee has pointed out some things we can do to improve local government. Let's try to take some of those options they've proposed and try to implement those. Let's work with the town government more carefully to try to improve the equity of cost. And then if things don't work out, you'll have another chance to vote on dissolution. But if you vote yes this time, that's it. There's no going back.
You and I served on that first committee like 20 years ago on dissolution, and not much has changed in the 20 years. The only role I see this conversation having is to create the incentive to go back to town government and make a more equitable distribution, especially around sales tax, and some conversations there. I mean, the village actually is the economic hub. All those same people drive in on your town's roads to use your facilities, to go to restaurants, grocery stores, go to the hospital. Do you see that conversation with the town improving post-dissolution study?
I do. I think this call for dissolution has opened everyone's eyes as to what could happen if there is not some improvement in the way we share our cost and the way we cooperate. So I hope that discussion we've been having now about dissolution will serve as an impetus for getting some things to change in the future.
I mean, you mentioned that 70% of our residential tax base is non-owner occupied. So if you were...
Not our tax base, but of our housing. Of our housing,
right. Of our housing. So 30% of this village has the vested interest of the village itself, because the other people generally are transient, and they're student or they're here short term. Having changes like your water and sewer distribution going to town outside of the village, that may be a good thing, because maybe your tenancy would move to an apartment based and families would start moving back into the village. It's hard to find a reasonably priced home for a starting family in this community. It's also very difficult for a senior wanting to shift from a very large Victorian village non-cost effective home to a small energy efficient home. Those housing choices aren't there. They were part of your long range plan, but they haven't come about.
Well, I agree with you, Susie. We need to improve our housing stock in the village, and part of my platform is to do that. I want to encourage the development of new single-family houses in the village. I want to encourage the development of apartments in the village. I think that can be done, and we see that there is some interest by some of these developers of coming in here.
Do you see any benefit? I had approached the village a year ago on a small, very, I would say not a lot of housing variable, because it was all designed for small dwellings in a partnership with SUNY Canton. There was a state law that had been drafted for a 10%, a 10-year abatement on new housing construction within a HUD income level guarantee, which we would have easily met those conditions given our median income. And that law never made it to your economic development table. It has since sunsetted, and only those communities that had accepted the law change are allowed to take part in the new sunset revision. Those kind of very small pieces of information citizens don't really know about. You have to drill down on hundreds of laws being put forth in the Senate and Assembly every week in New York State in order to know that. To me, that somebody dropped the ball. I know that when Paul was running, that same law draft for new housing rehabilitation made it through all the taxing entities, and it was passed. And you've seen some rehab work done in the village where there was a tax abatement for the 10-year period. it's those kind of tools that would help develop, I think, your housing stock.
Sure, certainly. And one of the things I'm going to look at is the state legislature can and has in the past passed tax abatement laws for particular communities to help develop their housing. And one of the things I'm going to do is go down to the state legislature and see if they can help us out with that.
So you mentioned one thing that's close to my interest, and that's sales tax distribution. And as you're aware, Steve, it used to be based on taxable assessed value and the distribution to the towns and the villages, which meant that the town outside the village residents got a much better break than the village residents did with that. Efforts were made, I was involved in it, to try and change that, and over a 5-year period, with the proper action on the part of the county legislature in the state of New York, it was changed to 50% taxable.
Yep. And that was a big improvement,
50%,
so thank you for working on that.
But is that as far as we should go with that? It's people who create sales tax revenue. It's not a building that is assessed for something that does it, it's people. And to me, it should be a higher percentage than it is. And I don't know whether the village would be interested in pursuing that particular issue again, to see if it could be made even more equitable between the way it's distributed.
I'm certainly interested in trying to reopen that discussion. It's going to be a very difficult discussion. As you know, it was difficult even to get to the 50-50 rule.
Yes.
But certainly, I think we need to continue to make those arguments about what's fair, what's equitable, and continue to chip away at it.
Okay.
Your vision for the village, has it changed any from the comprehensive plan?
I think perhaps a little bit. But I do think the comprehensive plan was the current edition is a good one. But I'm happy to see that we have another comprehensive plan committee together. I'm interested to see what they come up with. I think the plan is just a working document. It's something that's going to evolve over time, clearly. And so I think there's some things, if you look at our comprehensive plan, we accomplished quite a few things that were in that plan. But of course, the new plan will have some new goals. So I'm just looking forward to seeing what that group of citizens, we've got a great group of people together, see what they propose for the comprehensive plan.
In a lot of respects, Potsdam is kept alive through youth. And when you look at some of the sound bites, economic development, stop the brain drain, retain our graduates. I have a mixed sense about that. I truly would like our graduates to go elsewhere and learn from others. And, if we have the benefit of that wealth coming back to our community, fine, but there's a stagnation here that you really wouldn't wish on people who have grown up here, gone through our school districts, stayed here in college. How do you see our community benefiting from maybe targeting a different population, the aging population that has actually grown in numbers here? Our children are leaving. Even your school districts have a 20% loss in youth. How do we make our community, which is not very handicapped accessible, which is driven by the college youth factor, open itself up to an aging group and probably people who are looking for their next profession? They've taken early retirement. There's a huge gap in human capital and opportunities for them. You're underemployed here if you stay. And chances are, if you've taken an early bit of retirement, you may find a different career in a school district or elsewhere, but that's just happening by chance. Is there any opportunity for economic development around that new market?
I think so. My sense is that we have students who come here and discover Potsdam as students, and many of them like it a lot, like this place a lot, and then they leave, and that's fine. They go on to careers elsewhere. But oftentimes, I think they have that fond remembrance of the village, and they might like to get back at some point. And I've encouraged our Economic Development Office to work with the alumni relations groups at the various colleges and take that mailing address of those alums and send out some information and say, you know, here's welcome back to Potsdam. You're welcome to come back. Here are some things we can offer you. And I'd like to continue that outreach as well. But I love the fact that we have youth here. The colleges,
I do too.
I think it's great. I think the colleges and our hospital are our big economic engines, and we want to see them thrive, certainly. And so one of the things I would do as mayor, part of my platform, is to try to improve our cooperation with those big institutions and have them work with the village to find some win-win situations. It's not just about going to them and saying, give us more money, because they're struggling financially as well. But it's going to them and saying, how can we work together so that we can make this a better place? Because we're all in this together, right? Their future and the village's future are certainly linked together. So I think we could do more in terms of working together.
So to piggyback on the comments you made, 25 years ago, the County Chamber of Commerce was involved in a program for a couple of years to try to attract retirees to this area, talking about that. And one of the issues, you know, my wife and I have discussed, people say, oh, I'm bored. How can you be bored in Potsdam or Canton? There are so many things to do that you can't take advantage of all of them. You just, to me, it's the perfect place for someone to come retire. If they want to leave and go someplace warmer for 2 or 3 months, fine. That's
sure.
But have this be their home
We have
base.
a beautiful summer,
And
spring and
a lot of
fall.
that stuff is written up and probably is still in the files of the
Yeah.
County Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah.
So we could access that
Yeah, sure.
and help, but we'd have to tailor it to our own particular community.
Yeah.
But I think that's a great idea. Now,
And I would do this broader than the village. I think we do have to take a regional point of view
Regional.
about things and bring people, you know, St. Lawrence students may want to come back, Canton Tech students, I still call Canton Tech, students still might want to come back. I think anybody coming back into our region, I think would be welcome to have those folks come back. I'd certainly like to encourage the schools, for example, to have programs in this summer perhaps, where they encourage some of their alums to come back and maybe do some continuing education or something like that. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
One of the things that it's probably, now, I'm a parent of 2 kids. I don't want my kids to stay here. I want them to go out and experience the world. But they've both said the same thing.
Would you like to see them come back sometime?
Yeah, I think there's an appropriate time for that. But there has to be also the appropriate opportunity to start a family, grow a family, and have economic opportunity. We're $20,000 behind the median income for New York State. That is a huge risk for people who want to send their kids to institutions outside of the area. If you sat in Potsdam's graduation last year, I was shocked by the number of kids that are staying here, but they're doing it because they can live at home.
It's not the best of economic times for
No.
students graduating, is it? And I
No.
hope that changes
I mean, I
soon.
hope our colleges respect that and
I'm
understand
sorry
that.
we took you away from a beautiful fall day.
That's all right. It's not over.
We
It's not over
appreciate
yet.
the opportunity.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Well, good
Thanks,
luck to
thanks
you.
for the chance to talk. Thank you.
I'm sorry, but we are out of time. On behalf of our organizers, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to talk with us and your willingness to participate in the local civic media program. Please come back next week for another candidate conversation. Until then, remember, our North Country matters.